Welcome to today we're going to be learning how to create a display case for small objects, and it's going to be like a whole bunch of different things going on. To do that, we've got to do some math first to figure out how big each thing is and if it's going to fit or not. So I'm going to switch the camera over to down so you can see what I'm drawing. You need a piece of paper, a pencil, and a calculator. You need to do this work. You're going to turn this work in as part of your products for this project. All right, here we go. All right, so first of all, at the top of your paper, I want you to write down display case. That way we know what we're doing. And I've got an extra big piece of paper here, so you may need to use multiple sheets of paper as you go through all these calculations. First thing I want to write down is some basic information. I'm building display case for these motors, so I've measured the width and the width and the height of the opening that I want. So I'm going to record that over here. So this is the opening dimensions. So each little storage thing needs to be a certain height and width. I'm going to draw out a rectangle. I always like to draw out a rectangle if I'm doing something like this so I can actually put the measurements somewhere. So this one for me ends up being 3.25 in this direction. So from here to here is 3.25. I'll do little lines that connect them, centimeters. And then from here to here, that ends up being for me 5.75 centimeters. I'll put a little line to connect them. So that's how big my opening should be. And then the other thing I want to do is measure the depth. So whatever you're going to put in this, I'm going to draw a little line and angle like this. And I'm going to draw a line out from all three of these corners and then connect the backs over like this. And then I'm going to draw, I'm going to put an arrow going to here, and I'm going to say this one is 3.5 centimeters. So now I've got that fully figured out. Now that's the size of the opening. So whatever you're going to put in these things, go measure it and figure out how wide and deep and tall you want each opening to be. Make sure to give yourself a little bit of room to play with so it's not so kind of crowded in there. Okay, that's perfect. We're ready to rock and roll now. Now we got to figure out if what we want to do is going to fit. So there's two ways to think about the plywood going. The first way is if the plywood is going horizontally. So our piece of plywood ends up having dimensions of 30 centimeters this way. So if we put the plywood sideways, think about it this way. And then we have 60 centimeters this way. And you can start seeing how we do dimensioning. So if you're inside of an object, you do it with arrows that point at or near the side that you're going to. And if you're on the outside, you do it with these little lines that show the start and the stop of the measurement. So that's what that means. Or we can imagine, so this would be if we want our display case to be wide, wider than it is tall. Or we can imagine our display case lying on this way so that it is taller than it is wide. So here, this would be the 30 centimeters across this way. And now my height from here to here is actually 60 centimeters. And another thing you can do, it's not mandatory, but another thing you can do is if you rotate your paper sideways, you could write the 60 in the direction of this line, which makes it a little easier to see what it's referring to. All right, but I can't rotate mine, and it's too hard to rotate my arm over there. So I'm going to break this into two columns. So these are two different options. We can think of the cases being wide and short, or narrow and tall. It's really up to you. It's like, what do you want to see? What do you prefer of these two orientations? But we're going to do the calculations on both of them because sometimes it's a much more efficient use to put it sideways as opposed to vertical. So we'll see both of those. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the number of openings that we can squeeze in. Because we have to have a back to our case to make it strong, our case can't be any bigger than 60 by 30, which is about 2 feet by 1 foot. So it's a pretty good sized display case, but it can't be bigger than that. So we're going to figure out how big it can be exactly. And to do that, we're going to figure out the number of openings in the width direction. So that's in this direction. That's width right there. And I know my width is 60 centimeters total. So I'm going to put that on top of the fraction. And I want to figure out how many of these openings I can fit in. So I'm going to divide 60, the total width, by 5.75. That will tell me the number of 5.75 openings that fit into 60 centimeters. So here is 5.75. But it's important at this point to note that each opening isn't all by itself. There's going to be a piece of plywood on each side of the opening. So we have to add in one width of plywood. To do that, I'm going to come back over here to my opening dimensions. I'm going to write down plywood thickness. That way I have that number written down. And the real thickness of the plywood is like 2.7 something millimeters or 0.27 centimeters. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to estimate it as 0.3 centimeters. You do the same. By overestimating the thickness of it, we're going to make sure that our measurements never get bigger than this piece of plywood. So we're going to err on the side of caution here. All right, so because I need an opening and a piece of plywood, I'm going to say 0.03 centimeters here. I'm going to add that to the bottom. So my opening is really the opening plus a piece of plywood thick. Now if I do this, I'm going to simplify it to 60 centimeters, and then I put these two things together. I just add 5.75 plus 0.3, I get 6.05. So 6.05 centimeters. I'm really trying to cram stuff in here. And then when I do this math, I just do 60 divided by 6.05. I get, I'm going to rewrite this actually down below. So this is 60 still from here. And this together became 6.05 centimeters. And altogether, this equals 9.92 openings. So I can squeeze in 9.92 openings. But what's a 0.92 opening? That doesn't make any sense. Like, I would have to cut the motor down small. I'd like chop a piece of the motor off, which I don't want to do that. So I needed to round this down to 9. I can't fit 10, right? So if I tried to go up to 10, it wouldn't be enough room. So I got to go down to 9, which means on this end, I'm going to waste some plywood. I'm going to waste 0.9 of plywood right there. 0.9 of my opening. All right, so that's my width. I can get 9 wide, so 9 across here, boom, 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 boom. Now I'm going to switch over and think about the height. And the height is the similar calculation, except instead of 60, my height is this one. So it's going to be 30 centimeters divided by, and instead of using the width here, I'm going to use the height of 3.25. You're going to use your number, not mine. And we're all going to use 0.3 for our thickness. So remember, the height is going to include plus a thickness of plywood, which is plus 0.3 centimeters. If I add these together, I get 3.25 plus 0.3. I get that it is 30 centimeters divided by 3.55 centimeters. And I'm going to do that math right now. 30 divided by 3.55. And I'm going to say it's 8.45. So I can get almost 8.5 openings here. But what's a half opening? We can't use a half opening. So we really need to round this down to just 8 openings. We cannot round up to 9. Now notice here, I threw away 0.45 of an opening. I didn't use it because it just didn't fit. So I got a small waste up here as well. So I've got a bunch of, good amount of waste here and a little bit of waste up there. All right. So next, let's do the exact same thing for this orientation. So this is going to be the number of openings. We're going to start with the width, except now the width is this one, 30 centimeters. So it's 30 centimeters, but I don't switch these numbers because I still want my opening to be wide this far. So it's going to be this number right here, 6.05. It's going to be the 5.75 opening plus a piece of plywood. So it's going to be 6.05 centimeters. And when I do that math, I'm going to get 30 divided by 6.05. I'm going to get 4.96. And you're like, Mr. Haas, let's just round that up to 5. The problem is 4.96 barely fits. If we round up at all, it's not going to fit. It's going to be over here. Even a little bit is not going to work. So we got to round this number down to 5. And now we see that in our width, we're going to have like a 0.9. Did I just say round down to 5? Round down to 4. We're going to notice that we're going to have about a 0.96 of waste here. So a good amount of waste across our width, which is fine. Like we're just figuring things out. And now our height is going to equal this one. So our height is over here at 60. So it's going to be 60 centimeters. The height of each opening is still 3.25 plus the 0.3. So it's still the 3.55. So 3.55 centimeters. And when I do that, I'm going to say 60 divided by 3.55 is 16.9. Well, let's just round that up to 17, but we can't because it won't be on there. It'll be like over. We can't have it over, so we have to also round this one down to 16. And now we can compare these two. So if I look back at this one, I say, well, we could get 9 wide and 8 high, so we could do 9 times 8 equals 72 total openings. So 9 rows of 8 is 72 different things we could put in there. Over here, the way I have it done is I can get 4 times 16, which is 64 total openings. And notice how I get more openings just by rotating the sideways. And here's why. I lose 0.92 here, but only 0.45 in this direction. So I lose a bunch off the edge and only a little bit off the top. Whereas this one, I'm actually losing 0.96 across this edge and another 0.9 across this, so I lose a bunch over here as well. So I'm just using the plywood more efficiently. Now that shouldn't drive your decision. If you want something that is taller than it is wide, still use this. It's just going to mean you can't get more than 64 in this case. Or you could get double this. If you made 2 of these, you could actually make it 128 by putting 2 of them next to each other. You can actually just make 2 different ones. When we do the modeling in Fusion, we'll model just one, but you'll just cut 2 of them out. So yeah, that's fantastic. So at this point, we need to start making some decisions, like which way do we want our stuff to go? Do we want it wider than it is tall, or taller than it is wide? You make up your mind. I've made up my mind. So down here, I'm going to go with final dimensions. I'm going to make some decisions. Now, because my storage stuff has to fit in a particular size drawer, I've chosen to do a 6 by 6 using this horizontal location like this. So I'm going to have my plywood be sideways like this, and then bam, like that. And because each one of my openings is wider than it is tall, because I'm 6 by 6, my whole display cabinet is going to be wider than it is tall. So I'm going to do it like this and like this-ish. Awesome. And now I'm going to actually draw it out because I want to see what it looks like. So to do 6 pieces, I'm going to cut it in half first because there's a halfway between 6. So there's supposed to be 3 here and 3 here. And then here I can just kind of eyeball thirds. And I'm pretty good at eyeballing halves and thirds. So I can just do this without measuring. You could also use a ruler and get it really nice looking. But what I'm looking for is just a rough estimate of what things are happening here. So that gives me 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. Same thing on this other side. I'm going to do 6, and I'm going to go like right in the middle. And then I'm going to estimate. That's about a third. That's about a third. And then a third and a third. And now I'm going to draw these over. I find drawing a straight line is easier if you drag your hand and not, like if you try and rotate your hand and sketch it, you move all around. But if you keep your hand still and just drag the whole hand, it can be a little easier to get straight lines. Give that technique a shot. See if you find it the same way. All right, so there's all my little rectangles. You can see all my motors will fit in all these little parts here, and there'll be 36 of them in this one. All right, so that looks really good so far. Now we have the width now for me is going to be along this side. So this is my width along there, and this is my height along this side. And I want to now figure out what my actual widths and heights are going to be to make sure that they're actually going to fit on my piece of plywood. Because if I made a mistake somewhere, it's easier to find that mistake right now when I'm doing math than it is when I go to cut it out and nothing fits in the plywood and I'm like, what is going on? This is crazy. So yeah, let's do it. So our width is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these wide. So our width is equal to our width of our opening, 5.75, times 6, plus I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces of plywood in there, plus the plywood, which we're still estimating is 0.3, times 7. And we're going to end up being 5.75 times 6 plus 0.3 times 7 is equal to 41.8 centimeters. So I need to make sure that I'm on the plywood, and I've got 60 in this direction, and 41.8 works great. So I'm good. Now this won't actually be a full 41.8 because we'll put this real number to be a little smaller, but this is just making sure that we fit. Because if we did some wrong mathematics over here, we want to catch it now, not later. And now for the height, I'll do the same calculation, but with different numbers. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 openings this way. Each one's 3.25. So 3.25 high times 6 plus I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces of plywood. So 0.3 centimeters for each plywood times 7 is equal to 3.25 times 6 plus 0.3 times 7, 21.6 centimeters. Now this side is this one, and it's got to be under 30, and it is well under 30. Now you might be thinking, Mr. Hawsey, you're wasting a ton of plywood, but I'm actually not, because when I knock it down, I'll be able to use the extra pieces of plywood at the top to put in the sides. I'll be able to cut some of the sides up there too. So you'll see how we squeeze everything in and make it work. Okay, so I think that's it. I think we're ready to rock and roll. So for the actual modeling, you need a bunch of numbers. You need to know your height of your opening, your width of your opening, and the depth of the opening. You also need to know how many wide and how many tall your openings will be. You don't need these two numbers. These were just estimates. We're not going to use these two numbers ever. So just this one, this one, this one, and these two numbers. Awesome. We'll see you in the next video, and we'll actually start doing some modeling and fusion.